The October wind swept across the golden wheat field like a whisper from another time. Garrett Hollister stood at the edge of his property, watching his twin daughters chase each other through the swaying stalks, their laughter carrying on the autumn breeze like wind chimes in a storm. Wren, the bolder of the two, ran ahead with her arms spread wide, pretending to be an airplane. Juniper followed more carefully, stopping every few steps to examine an interesting rock or a late-blooming wildflower. At 6 years old, they were mirror images of each other, yet completely different souls. Wren led, Juniper observed. Together, they were the only light left in Garrett's world. He was 36 years old, though the lines around his eyes told stories of a man who had lived several lifetimes. 10 years in special forces had taught him how to survive in the harshest environments on Earth, but nothing had prepared him for the quiet devastation of raising two daughters alone after burying the woman he loved. Linnea had been gone for 4 years now. A car accident, they said. Wrong place, wrong time. A drunk driver crossing the center line on Highway 89, just 3 miles from this very spot. Garrett had replayed that night 1,000 times in his mind. If only he had picked her up from work. If only he had insisted she wait for him. If only, if only, if only. He still wore his wedding ring. He still kept her pillow on her side of the bed. He still caught himself turning to tell her something funny the girls had said, only to find empty air where her smile should have been. After her death, he had walked away from his career as a software engineer in Seattle. The corner office and the six-figure salary meant nothing without someone to share it with. He brought the girls back to his family's ranch in Montana, took a job as a mechanic at the local garage, and built a life of quiet routine. Wake up, make breakfast, take the girls to school, fix cars, pick up the girls, make dinner, read bedtime stories, repeat. It was not living, it was existing. But for Wren and Juniper, he would exist forever if he had to. "Daddy, look what I found," Juniper called out, holding up a smooth river stone that caught the afternoon light. Her voice was soft, always soft, as if she was afraid of disturbing the world around her. Garrett smiled, the expression feeling almost foreign on his face. "That's beautiful, Junie Bug. You should add it to your collection." "Can we walk to the fence?" Wren asked, already moving in that direction without waiting for permission. "I want to see if the butterflies are still there." Garrett hesitated. The fence marked the boundary of his property where it met Highway 89. He usually avoided that area. Too many memories of red and blue lights, of a crumpled sedan, of a phone call that had ended his world. But the girls loved watching the monarch butterflies that gathered near the old wooden posts this time of year. "All right," he said, falling into step behind them. "But stay close." They walked through the wheat field, the stalks brushing against their legs like gentle fingers. The afternoon sun painted everything in shades of gold and amber, and for a moment, just a moment, Garrett felt something close to peace. Then he saw her. His body registered the threat before his conscious mind could process the scene. Years of military training kicked in, every sense sharpening to a razor's edge. A woman sat slumped against a fence post, her designer clothes torn and dirty. Blood had dried in a dark streak above her left eyebrow. Her auburn hair was matted with dust and tangled with bits of grass. 20 yards away, an expensive SUV sat in the ditch, steam rising from its crumpled hood like the dying breath.
Aren't gonna ask why I ran away?
You'll tell me when you're ready. For now, your safety is paramount.
Breath of a wounded animal. "Girls, stop," Garrett commanded, his voice sharp with authority. Wren and Juniper froze immediately, recognizing the tone that meant their father was not to be questioned. "Stay right there. Don't move." He approached the woman slowly, scanning the surroundings for additional threats. Old habits. In the villages of Afghanistan, an injured civilian could be bait for an ambush. Here in Montana, the danger was more likely internal injuries or shock, but Garrett's body didn't know the difference. The woman looked up as he drew near, and Garrett felt his breath catch in his throat. Despite the injuries in the dirt, she was striking. High cheekbones, full lips, eyes the color of morning fog. But it wasn't her beauty that stopped him cold. It was the bracelet on her wrist. A silver band, delicately crafted, with the image of a hawk in flight etched into the metal. The wings spread wide, each feather rendered in exquisite detail. Garrett knew those feathers. He knew the exact curve of those wings. He knew because his wife had spent 3 months designing that bracelet, had stayed up late into the night perfecting every line. Linnea had made two of them, one for herself, which Garrett had placed on her wrist before they closed the casket, one for Thomas Whitmore, the intelligence officer whose life Garrett had saved in the mountains of Afghanistan, as a thank you gift from a grateful wife. The bracelet he was looking at now was supposed to be buried 6 feet underground in the Hollister family cemetery, or on the wrist of a man who had died of cancer 2 years ago. Yet here it was, catching the October light on the arm of a stranger. "Ma'am," Garrett heard himself say, his voice sounding distant and strange, "are you hurt?" The woman tried to focus on him, her eyes cloudy with pain and something else. Fear. The kind of fear Garrett had seen in the eyes of villagers who knew they were being hunted. I'm Serena," she managed. "Serena Whitmore. My car." She gestured weakly toward the wreckage. Whitmore. The name hit Garrett like a physical blow. Thomas Whitmore's sister. The sister Thomas had talked about during those long nights in the mountains, when they huddled together for warmth and shared stories to keep the darkness at bay. Thomas had shown him pictures, had spoken of her with such pride. "She runs a tech company now," he had said. "Smartest person I know. Stubborn as a mule, but she's got a heart of gold." "The bracelet," Garrett said, unable to stop himself. "Where did you get that bracelet?" Serena looked down at her wrist, confusion mixing with pain on her face. "My brother gave it to me. Before he died. He said," she paused, swallowing hard. "He said if I was ever in trouble, I should find the man who made it possible for him to give it to me. A soldier named Garrett Hollister." The world seemed to tilt on its axis. Garrett reached out to steady himself against the fence post, his mind racing to make sense of what was happening. Linnea had made that bracelet. Thomas had worn it for years. And now Thomas's sister was here, on Garrett's land, wearing the symbol of a connection that spanned death itself. "My wife made that bracelet," Garrett said quietly. "She made two. One for Thomas, one for herself. I buried hers with her 4 years ago." Serena's eyes widened, recognition and shock flooding her features. "You're Garrett Hollister? The one who carried my brother 3 miles under enemy fire?" Before Garrett could respond, small footsteps approached. Wren and Juniper had crept closer, their curiosity overcoming their obedience. "Daddy, is the pretty lady hurt?" Wren asked, her voice carrying the direct concern of childhood. Juniper hung back, clutching Captain Whiskers, the one-eyed teddy bear that had been her constant companion since Linnea's death. Her mother had given it to her on her 3rd birthday, just months before the accident. Juniper slept with it every night, carried it everywhere, talked to it when she thought no one was listening. Now, without hesitation, she stepped forward and held the bear out to Serena. "This is..."
You want no hospital, no police? That means you're being hunted.
Yes. And if I stay here, you and the 2 children will be in danger.
"Captain Whiskers," she said softly. "He makes everything better when you're hurt. Mommy gave him to me." Serena looked at the offered treasure, at the small face so full of innocent compassion, and tears began spilling down her dirt-streaked cheeks. "Thank you, sweetheart," she whispered. "He's perfect." Garrett watched the exchange, something shifting in his chest that he couldn't quite name. The military part of his brain was cataloging details, assessing threats, planning next steps. But another part, a part he had thought long dead, was responding to the vulnerability in Serena's eyes, the gentleness of Juniper's gesture, the unexpected tenderness of the moment. "We need to get you out of here," he said, making a decision. "My house is just over that hill. You can get cleaned up while I figure out what's going on." "No hospitals," Serena said quickly, panic flashing in her eyes. "No police, please. I just need somewhere safe to think." Garrett studied her face, reading the fear there, with the practiced eye of a man who had spent 2 decades assessing danger. She was running from something, or someone, and somehow, impossibly, fate had brought her to his doorstep. He thought of Linnea, of the bracelet she had crafted with such care, of the connection it represented between himself and Thomas Whitmore. He thought of his friend's dying wish, passed along through his sister. "Find Garrett Hollister. He'll protect you." "All right," Garrett said, reaching down to help Serena to her feet. "Let's get you inside." As he supported her weight as they began the slow walk toward the farmhouse with the twins running ahead to open doors, Garrett Hollister had no idea that this moment would change everything. That the woman leaning against him carried secrets that would unravel the last 4 years of his life. That the truth about Linnea's death was far darker than he had ever imagined. That the real enemy was closer than he could possibly know. But some part of him, some instinct honed by years of combat and loss and survival, already sensed that nothing would ever be the same again. The bracelet on Serena's wrist caught the fading sunlight, the silver hawk seeming to take flight with each step they took. And somewhere in the distance, a phone was ringing, a warning that would set everything in motion. The Hollister farmhouse had stood on this land for 4 generations, its white clapboard siding and stone chimney bearing witness to births and deaths, joy and sorrow. The endless cycle of a family rooted in Montana soil. Garrett led Serena up the porch steps while the twins raced ahead, eager to help. Inside, the house breathed warmth and lived in comfort. Family photos lined the mantel. Children's drawings covered the refrigerator, and everywhere there were small signs of a life being lived despite tragedy. Among the bright artwork and smiling faces were several photographs of a beautiful woman with honey blonde hair and a radiant smile. Linnea, forever frozen in time, forever watching over the family she had left behind. Garrett guided Serena to the kitchen table and retrieved his medical kit. Years of combat had made him an expert at treating wounds in less than ideal conditions. Skin, knees, and bee stings were nothing compared to shrapnel injuries in a mountain cave. "This might sting," he warned, dabbing antiseptic on the cut above her eyebrow. Serena watched his hands as he worked, large, calloused hands that could have easily caused pain, but instead moved with extraordinary gentleness. He didn't ask who she was. He didn't demand to know why she was running. He didn't look at her designer clothes and calculate her net worth, or look at her injuries and calculate her vulnerability. He simply saw a person in pain and chose to help. When had anyone last done that? In her world of corporate politics and power plays, every interaction came with strings attached. Every kindness had a price tag. Every helping hand eventually became an open palm demanding payment. But this man, this stranger with sad eyes and careful hands, expected nothing from her except the chance to make her hurt a little less. "You're not going to ask me anything?" she heard herself say, her voice rough with exhaustion and something else, something that felt dangerously like hope. Garrett looked up, meeting her eyes for the first time since he'd begun treating her wound. "You'll tell me when you're ready," he said simply. "Right now, you're hurt and you're scared. That's enough for me to know." It was such a small thing, such a simple thing.
I just need a place to breathe and keep this evidence safe.
You keep the evidence, I keep you safe.
Deal.
But in that moment, Serena Whitmore, CEO, billionaire, one of the most powerful women in Silicon Valley, felt truly seen for the first time in years, not as a target, not as an asset, not as a problem to be solved, just as a human being who needed help. Ren appeared at Serena's elbow, her face serious with childlike concern. "Daddy makes the best soup when people are hurt," she announced. "He learned how to cook in the army." "Is that so?" Serena managed a small smile. "It's true," Juniper added quietly, peeking around her father's leg. "And he tells the best stories about brave soldiers." Garrett finished bandaging Serena's wound and stepped back, studying her with the assessing gaze of a man deciding whether to trust. She had asked for no police, no hospitals. She was clearly running from something dangerous. But Thomas had trusted her enough to send her to him with his dying breath. That had to count for something. "The girls are going to wash up for dinner," he said, his tone leaving no room for argument. "And then you're going to tell me everything." By the time Ren and Juniper were settled at the table with bowls of vegetable soup, Serena had collected herself enough to speak. Garrett sat across from her, his coffee growing cold in his hands, as she unfolded a story that would change everything he thought he knew about his life. She ran a technology company, she explained. Cybersecurity. Her firm had developed encryption protocols used by government agencies, military operations, Fortune 500 companies. It was worth billions, and it had made her one of the most powerful women in Silicon Valley. 3 years ago, she had become engaged to a man named Damian Cross. Charming, brilliant, connected. He had swept into her life like a summer storm, all intensity and passion and promises of forever. She had believed him, she had trusted him, She had been wrong. Damien had been systematically stealing her company's most sensitive technology and selling it to foreign intelligence services. When Serena discovered the theft, when she gathered the evidence and confronted him, he had tried to turn it around on her, had accused her of paranoia, of jealousy, of being unable to handle his success. But Serena Whitmore had not built a billion-dollar company by being easily manipulated. She had taken everything to the FBI. Damien was now serving 15 years in federal prison. But he wasn't working alone, Serena continued, her voice dropping lower. The twins had finished their soup and were now coloring at the other end of the table, absorbed in their own world of crayons and imagination. I started digging deeper after his arrest, following money trails, decrypting communications, tracing connections, and I found something much bigger. How big? Garrett asked. The kind of big that gets people killed. Serena's hands trembled slightly as she wrapped them around her coffee cup. There's someone inside the FBI protecting Damien's network. Someone high up, and 3 days ago when I got close to identifying him, people started dying, my lawyer, my security chief, anyone who knew what I knew. So you ran. I ran. Serena nodded, her eyes haunted. I grabbed what evidence I could and I ran. Thomas had always told me if I was ever in real trouble, find Garrett Hollister. He said you were the most honorable man he ever knew. He said you would protect me. Garrett processed this information with the cold efficiency of a tactical assessment. Threat level, extreme. Resources available, limited. Potential casualties, 3 children under his roof plus 1 civilian under his protection. You mentioned the FBI, he said slowly. Do you know who the mole is? Before Serena could answer, Garrett's phone rang. The specific ringtone made him tense, the emergency line he kept for situations that couldn't wait. He answered on the second ring. Hollister. Garrett, it's Bill. Bill Tanner, deputy sheriff and an old friend from Garrett's military days. His voice was tight with concern.
Will you help me rebuild a home for the 2 children?
Yes, I agree.
Listen, I just got a strange bolo. 2 black SUVs with Seattle plates, asking about a woman matching the description of someone who might be at your place. They're flashing FBI badges, but something feels off about them. How far out? 20, maybe 30 minutes. Garrett, they're claiming she's a missing executive having some kind of mental breakdown, but the way they're asking questions, Bill paused. It feels like a hunting party, not a rescue mission. Garrett's jaw tightened. Thanks for the heads up. I owe you one. He ended the call and turned to find Serena watching him with fear-bright eyes. She had heard enough. They found me, she whispered. Not yet. Garrett was already moving, his body shifting into operational mode. Girls, adventure time, get your go bags. Wren and Juniper looked up from their coloring, their faces showing no surprise. This was not the first time their father had called a sudden adventure. After his return from overseas, when the nightmares had been at their worst, they had practiced this drill dozens of times. The girls knew exactly what to do. Within 5 minutes, they were in Garrett's reinforced SUV, heading away from the farmhouse on a back road that wound through his property rather than toward the main highway. Serena sat in the passenger seat, clutching a waterproof bag that contained hard drives and documents she had grabbed from her wrecked vehicle. Where are we going? She asked. Somewhere safe. Garrett's eyes constantly checked the mirrors, scanning for pursuit. A friend's place in the mountains. Off-grid, defensible. They won't find us there. In the back seat, Wren had taken charge of keeping her sister calm. It's okay, Junie, she was saying. Daddy knows what to do. He always keeps us safe. Juniper nodded, hugging Captain Whiskers tight. But her eyes found Serena in the front seat, and she spoke with a certainty that seemed borrowed from some older soul. Don't be scared, Miss Serena. Daddy saved lots of people in the war. He'll save you, too. Something cracked in Serena's carefully maintained composure. She turned to look at the small face offering such unconditional faith and felt her throat tightening. When had anyone last believed in her like that? When had anyone last offered her comfort without expecting something in return? Thank you, sweetheart, she managed. I believe you. The drive to Decker Callahan's cabin took 4 hours of winding mountain roads and unmarked trails. Decker had served with Garrett in Afghanistan, had been with him on the night they pulled Thomas Whitmore from a burning Humvee. He was the kind of man who kept emergency supplies stocked, communication equipment maintained, and asked questions only after the immediate danger had passed. He met them at the door with a shotgun in one hand and coffee in the other. "Trouble to Sasyama?" he asked simply, taking in Garrett's tense posture and Serena's disheveled appearance. "The kind that follows," Garrett confirmed. Decker nodded, requiring no further explanation. "Cabin secure. Got a bunker underneath that doesn't exist on any map. The little ones will be safe there if things go sideways." It was while settling the girls in the underground shelter that Garrett's secure phone buzzed with an encrypted message. Decker had been running background checks through his network of former military contacts. What he found made Garrett's blood run cold. The man leading the hunt for Serena, the FBI official who had activated federal resources to track a civilian across state lines, was Preston Hollister. Deputy Director Preston Hollister, Garrett's own cousin. "You know him?" Serena asked, watching the color drain from Garrett's face. "We served together. Afghanistan, 2011. Garrett's voice was flat, controlled, but his hands had curled into fists at his sides. "There was an incident, civilian casualties that Preston tried to cover up with falsified reports. I reported him up the chain. He had connections, got transferred to the FBI instead of court-martialed. He spent the last 13 years building power and holding a grudge. He came to Linnea's funeral," Garrett continued, the words tasting like ash. "He hugged me, told me how sorry he was, and the whole time, he couldn't finish the sentence. Couldn't put into words the magnitude of the betrayal taking shape in his mind. "Garrett," Serena said slowly, "there's something else you need to know. When I was gathering evidence on Damien's network, I found a list. Assets who had been neutralized. People who got too close to the truth and had to be eliminated." She pulled out a tablet, scrolled through files with trembling fingers. "Your wife's name is on that list. Linnea Hollister, date of neutralization, the same day she died." The world stopped. Garrett stood frozen, unable to breathe, unable to think, unable to do anything but stare at the screen in front of him. 4 years. 4 years of blaming himself, of wondering if he could have done something different, of drinking himself to sleep because the guilt was too heavy to carry sober. Linnea hadn't died in an accident. She had been murdered, and his own cousin had given the order. "She was doing the books for a company Preston was using to launder money," Serena explained, her voice gentle but relentless. "She must have noticed the discrepancies, must have started asking questions, so they silenced her." The rage that erupted in Garrett's chest was unlike anything he had ever experienced. Not the cold fury of combat, not the burning anger of betrayal, but something deeper, something primal. The mother of his children had been taken from him. His daughters had grown up without their mother because of Preston's greed, and Garrett had spent 4 years believing it was his fault. "Daddy?" Juniper's small voice cut through the red haze. She stood at the entrance to the shelter, Captain Whiskers clutched to her chest, her eyes wide with worry. "Daddy, why are you crying?" Garrett hadn't realized moisture had gathered in his eyes, falling freely down his weathered cheeks. He knelt down, opening his arms, and Juniper ran into them. Wren was right behind her, wrapping her small arms around her father's neck. "It's okay, Daddy," Wren whispered, patting his back the way he patted hers when she had nightmares. "It's okay to be sad. Mommy said it's okay to cry." In that moment, with his daughter's arms around him and the truth burning in his chest, Garrett made a decision. Preston Hollister would pay for what he had done, not just for Serena, not just for Thomas or the other victims on that list, for Linnea, for the 4 years of grief and guilt and lonely nights, for 2 little girls who would never again feel their mother's arms around them. Preston Hollister would answer for all of it. The goodbye at Decker's cabin was the hardest thing Garrett had ever done. Harder than combat, harder than burying his wife, harder than 4 years of raising 2 children alone. "We need to get to Denver," he explained, kneeling before his daughters. "Serena has evidence in a safety deposit box there. Once we get it, we can stop the bad people for good." "You're going to catch the man who hurt Mommy?" Wren asked, her young face fierce with righteous anger. "Yes, sweetheart. I'm going to make sure he never hurts anyone again." Juniper was quieter, her fingers working nervously at Captain Whisker's remaining ear. Finally, she stepped forward and pressed the bear into Serena's hands. "You take on him," she said softly. "He'll keep you and Daddy safe. And then—" She looked up, her eyes holding a depth of understanding no 6-year-old should possess. "And then you'll both come back. Together." Serena knelt down, accepting the precious offering with reverent hands. "I promise," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "I promise I'll bring your daddy back safe." As they walked to the truck, Juniper tugged on Serena's sleeve one more time. Her whisper was so quiet that Garrett, already climbing into the driver's seat, couldn't hear. "My mommy used to say that broken pieces can be put together into something even more beautiful. I think you and Daddy are both broken pieces. Maybe you're supposed to be put together." Serena's heart clenched. She had built an empire on logic and data and cold hard facts. But this child had just spoken a truth that cut straight to her soul. "Maybe we are," she whispered back. "Maybe we are." The drive to Denver was 6 hours of tension and quiet conversation. Garrett drove with the focused intensity of a man on a mission while Serena reviewed the evidence on her tablet, cross-referencing names and dates with what they had discovered about Preston's network. The safety deposit box was at First National Bank, downtown Denver, registered under the maiden name of Serena's grandmother. Only 2 people had known about it, Serena and her lawyer, Patricia Hoffman. Patricia, whose name appeared on the list of the neutralized. They entered the bank separately, Garrett going first to secure the location, while Serena followed 5 minutes behind. The exchange went smoothly. Too smoothly. By the time they emerged onto the sunlit street with the evidence secured in a waterproof bag across Serena's body, Garrett's instincts were screaming. He saw them a heartbeat before they moved. 2 men in dark suits, positioned at the corners of the building, their hands reaching inside their jackets. "Run," Garrett ordered, grabbing Serena's arm and pulling her toward the alley behind the bank. What followed was a blur of narrow escapes in desperate measures, through the employee parking lot, into a borrowed pickup truck, onto back roads that wound away from the main highways. But Preston's resources were vast, and he had clearly anticipated their route. The ambush came on a mountain road 40 miles outside Denver. Garrett saw the vehicles too late to avoid the trap. He swerved, trying to find an escape route, but gunfire erupted from both sides of the road. Something slammed into his side, a burning pain that stole his breath and sent the truck careening toward the ditch. The crash was violent. Airbags deployed, glass shattered, and the world spun into chaos. When Garrett's vision cleared, he found himself lying on the roadside, blood soaking through his shirt from a wound in his side. "Serena!" he called out, struggling to rise. "I'm here!" Her voice came from somewhere in the darkness beyond the wrecked vehicle. "Garrett, I'm okay, but they're coming." He could hear them now, the crunch of boots on gravel, the shouts of men coordinating their search. His military training kicked in, overriding the pain that screamed through his nervous system. He found Serena in the shadows, grabbed her hand, and pulled her toward a drainage culvert he had spotted during the crash. "Through here," he whispered. "It leads to the other side of the ridge. They won't be able to track us underground." They crawled through the narrow tunnel, the darkness pressing in from all sides, the sound of helicopter rotors thundering overhead. Garrett's wound left a trail of blood behind them, but he forced himself to keep moving. The girls needed him. Serena needed him. He could not afford to fail. They emerged on the other side of the mountain as night was falling, but in the chaos of the escape, in the darkness of the drainage tunnel, they had become separated. Serena found herself alone on the ridge, the waterproof bag clutched to her chest, the sounds of helicopter rotors fading into the distance. "Garrett?" she called out, her voice swallowed by the vast Montana wilderness. "Garrett!" No answer, only the wind through the pines and the distant cry of an owl. Her radio crackled to life, and for one desperate moment, hope surged through her chest. But the voice that came through was not Garrett's. It was cold, professional, final. "Target Alpha neutralized. Repeat, Garrett Hollister has been neutralized. Confirming kill." The words hit Serena like a physical blow. She sank to her knees on the forest floor, the weight of them crushing her chest until she couldn't breathe. Neutralized. Killed. Gone. She thought of Wren's fierce determination. She thought of Juniper's gentle wisdom. She thought of Captain Whiskers, still tucked in her jacket pocket, waiting to be returned to a little girl who would never see her father again. I promised, Serena whispered into the darkness. I promised I would bring him back. The tears came then, hot and bitter, carving paths down her face as the full weight of her failure pressed down upon her. She had led Garrett into this. She had brought danger to his doorstep, had torn him away from his daughters, had gotten him killed trying to protect her. For a long moment, she considered giving up. The evidence in her bag could disappear into the wilderness. She could vanish, start over somewhere far away, leave this nightmare behind. But then she remembered Garrett's voice, steady and certain, in those final moments before the ambush. Promise me, Serena, no matter what happens, the girls and the evidence have to be safe. Promise me. She had promised. And Serena Whitmore did not break her promises. Slowly, painfully, she pushed herself to her feet. Her body ached. Her heart was shattered. But somewhere out there, two little girls were waiting for news of their father. And somewhere in that evidence bag was the proof that could bring down the man who had destroyed so many lives. For Garrett, she said aloud, her voice hardening into something like steel. For Wren and Juniper, for Linnea, for Thomas. She checked her compass, oriented herself toward the coordinates Decker had provided, and began to walk. What Serena didn't know, what she couldn't possibly know, was that the radio transmission had been faked. Preston's technical team had intercepted their frequency and crafted a false report designed to break her spirit and flush her out. Garrett Hollister was not dead. He was wounded, yes, bleeding and exhausted and pushed to the very limits of human endurance. But he was alive, and he was already making his way toward the one person who could help him turn the tables on his treacherous cousin. Years of SEER training had taught Garrett to control his body's responses, to appear dead when he was merely waiting. In those long hours after the ambush, playing possum while Preston's men searched the area, he had managed to reach his backup communication device, the one sewn into the lining of his jacket, the one not even Serena knew about. His message to Decker had been brief. Alive. Preston's trap confirmed. Contact Inspector General Hayes through the old military channels. Tell him everything. Decker had done more than that. He had provided Hayes with coordinates, with evidence, with a full briefing on Preston's network. And Hayes, who had spent 30 years fighting corruption within the system, had mobilized a tactical team that answered to no one in Preston's chain of command. They had been tracking Preston's movements for 6 hours, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. That moment came at dawn. The old fire watchtower stood against the brightening sky as Serena approached, exhausted but unbroken. She had walked through the night, driven by grief and determination in the memory of two little girls who deserved to know the truth about their mother's death. But as she neared the designated meeting point, floodlights blazed to life from every direction. Armed men emerged from the surrounding forest, their weapons trained on her with professional precision. And walking calmly through their midst, looking as impeccable as if he were attending a board meeting rather than an illegal execution, came Preston Hollister. Miss Whitmore, he said, his voice carrying the smooth assurance of a man who had never been denied anything in his life. This unfortunate business has gone on long enough. Hand over the evidence, and perhaps we can come to an arrangement. Behind her, emerging from a black SUV that had just arrived, came two small figures flanked by armed guards. Wren and Juniper, their faces pale with fear, but their chins raised in defiance. Serena's heart stopped. The girls, did you really think a bunker built by former special forces would remain hidden from federal resources? Preston's smile was cold, triumphant. We've been tracking your friend Callahan for years. The moment you left those children in his care, they became my insurance policy. Wren spotted Serena and tried to run toward her, but a guard held her back. Miss Serena, we didn't tell them anything. Junie and I didn't say a word, just like Daddy taught us. Juniper said nothing, but her eyes found Serena's across the clearing, and in them was a trust so absolute it made Serena's chest ache. Let the girls go first, Serena demanded. You're not in a position to negotiate, Preston replied smoothly. Serena looked at Wren and Juniper, at their terrified eyes, at the brave way Wren was standing in front of her sister despite her own fear. She thought of the promise she had made. She thought of Captain Whiskers, still tucked in her jacket pocket. I'm sorry, she whispered, though whether to the girls or to Garrett, she didn't know. Don't be, said a voice from the darkness. a voice that made Preston's smug expression falter for the first time. Garrett stepped into the edge of the light. He looked like death walking. His clothes were torn and bloodied, his face gray with pain and exhaustion, but his eyes burned with a fire that no amount of suffering could extinguish. And the weapon in his hands was steady as a rock. Behind him, emerging from the pre-dawn shadows, came more figures. Not Preston's men, but a different force entirely. Federal agents in tactical gear, bearing insignia that identified them as Inspector General's office. "It's over, Preston," Garrett said, his voice carrying across the clearing like a pronouncement of doom. "Director Hayes has the evidence, all of it. Your network is being dismantled as we speak." Preston's face contorted with fury. "Impossible. You were dead. My team confirmed. Your team confirmed what I wanted them to confirm." Garrett's lips curved into something that was not quite a smile. "I learned a long time ago to let my enemies underestimate me." For a long moment, no one moved. Then Preston's hand flashed toward the weapon at his hip. He never completed the motion. Garrett's shot was precise, surgical, aimed not to kill but to disarm. The gun spun from Preston's grip as he screamed in pain, clutching his wounded hand. "That was for Linnea," Garrett said quietly, "for the woman you murdered because she was too honest to look the other way." Federal agents swarmed forward, surrounding Preston's men, taking them into custody with practiced efficiency. "Preston Hollister," one of them announced, "you are under arrest for treason, murder in the first degree, conspiracy against the United States, and obstruction of justice. You have the right to remain silent." But Garrett had eyes only for his daughters. "Daddy!" Wren and Juniper broke free from their captors and ran toward their father, throwing themselves into his arms with the desperate relief of children who had feared the worst. Garrett held them close, his eyes finally allowing the tears to fall, whispering reassurances into their hair. I'm here, I've got you. I'm not going anywhere." Juniper pulled back just enough to look up at him, her small face serious despite her tears. "You kept your promise," she said. "You came back." "Always," Garrett whispered. "Always." Then Juniper turned to find Serena standing nearby, watching the reunion with tears of her own. The little girl held out her hand. "You kept your promise too," Juniper said. "You brought Daddy back safe." Serena knelt down and gathered the child into her arms, her body shaking with the release of tension and fear and something else, something that felt like coming home. Wren joined the embrace, wrapping her small arms around both Serena and her sister. "I knew you would," she said firmly. "I knew you would both come back. Because that's what family does." Family. The word hung in the air like a blessing. Garrett stepped forward, drawing all three of them into his embrace. For the first time in 4 years, he felt whole. For the first time since Linnea's death, he felt like he might be allowed to hope again. 2 months later, the October twins swept across the wheat field, carrying the scent of autumn and the promise of change. 4 figures walked through the swaying stalks, their laughter mingling with the rustle of grain that had long since turned from gold to brown. Garrett held Juniper's hand in his left, Serena's in his right. Wren ran ahead of them, chasing the last butterflies of the season near the old wooden fence where everything had begun. So much had changed since that day. Preston was awaiting trial on charges that would keep him in prison for the rest of his life. His entire network had been dismantled, the stolen technology recovered, the victims' families finally given the truth about what had happened to their loved ones. Serena had moved her company's headquarters to Montana, preferring the mountain air to Silicon Valley smog. She worked from the farmhouse most days now, her laptop set up on the kitchen table where she could watch the twins play in the yard through the window. The girls had started calling her Miss Serena of ours somewhere along the way. Not quite Mom, not yet, but something close. Something that made her heart swell every time she heard it. They reached the fence as the sun began its descent toward the mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and amber. This was the spot where Garrett had found Serena 2 months ago, the spot where everything had changed. "Serena," Garrett said quietly, turning to face her while the girls chased each other nearby. "I need to tell you something." She looked up at him, at the face she had come to love over weeks of shared danger and growing trust and the quiet intimacy of building a life together. 4 years ago, I thought my life ended when I lost Linnea," Garrett continued. "I was just going through the motions. existing for the girls but not really living. And then you appeared, right here, wearing the bracelet my wife made, carrying a message from a friend I thought I'd never see again. He took her hands in his eyes bright with emotion. Linnea led you to us, through Thomas, through that bracelet, through every impossible coincidence that brought you to my fence that day. And I think she would want me to be happy again. I think she would want the girls to have a complete family. He knelt down right there in the fading light and pulled a small box from his pocket. Serena Whitmore, will you marry me? Will you help me raise these two amazing girls? Will you be my partner, my equal, my love for whatever time we have left? Serena was crying before he finished speaking. Through her tears, she managed a single word. Yes. The twins had stopped their game, watching with wide eyes. When they saw Serena nod, they erupted into cheers. She said yes, Ren shouted, doing a victory dance. I told you, Junie. I told you she would say yes. But Juniper wasn't celebrating. She walked slowly towards Serena, her expression thoughtful, and tugged on the woman's sleeve. Miss Serena, she said softly, if you're going to be Daddy's wife, can we call you something different? Serena knelt down to meet the child's eyes. What would you like to call me, sweetheart? Juniper glanced at her sister, then back at Serena. We know we already have a mommy in heaven. We know she'll always be our first mommy, but she hesitated, searching for words too big for her 6 years. But I think Mommy Linnea would be happy if we had another mommy here. Someone to hug us when we're sad. Someone to tell us stories. Someone to love us. Her voice dropped to a whisper. Can we call you Mommy Serena? Serena gathered the child into her arms, her heart so full it felt like it might burst. Nothing would make me happier, she whispered back. Nothing in the whole world. Duren joined the hug, and then Garrett wrapped his arms around all three of them, and they stood there as the sun set behind the mountains, a family forged from tragedy and loss, in the stubborn refusal to stop hoping for better. Mommy Linnea is smiling right now, Juniper said with absolute certainty, because we're all together. We're a family made of broken pieces, but that's okay. She looked up at the adults with eyes that held the wisdom of ages. Broken pieces can be put together into something even more beautiful. That's what Mommy Linnea always said. Garrett looked down at the bracelet on Serena's wrist, the silver hawk gleaming in the fading light. His wife had made that bracelet. His wife had, in her own way, brought this woman into his life, and his wife, he knew with sudden certainty, would approve. She's right, he said softly. Broken pieces, put together, more beautiful than before. Serena smiled through her tears, holding the children close, feeling Garrett's arms around them all. More beautiful than before, she agreed. And as the last light faded from the Montana sky, 4 people who had found each other through tragedy and danger and impossible coincidence walked back toward the farmhouse together. Not broken anymore, not alone, a family, home.
The story leaves a very clear lesson. Sometimes what kills a person isn't the danger outside, but the prolonged silence within after a loss. The father lived like a shadow for years, existing only for his child, trapped in guilt and the what-if thoughts. But when the woman appears with the falcon bracelet, a symbol of memory and connection, he is forced to face the truth. Pain cannot be erased, but it can be transformed into strength to protect what matters most. The story also reminds us that kindness sometimes begins with the smallest actions, like a little girl giving a teddy bear to a stranger, which can save a distraught heart and open a new home. Children's faith is not naive, but a light that helps adults rise again after a breakup. Ultimately, the greatest lesson is, family is not just about losing someone, but about choosing to stay, piecing together the broken pieces to create a more beautiful life.